the farm operations session. We have several more presentations, and Weatherly is going to continue to be our facilitator for those, and then we'll have time for some tabletop discussions again. So please welcome Weatherly.
Thanks again for joining us. That was a delicious lunch. Thanks to all our sponsors. First, we have Tammy Davis from Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Please welcome her.
Do those microphones also work?
Yeah. This one
is better. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always interesting where you end up on a agenda. You know, you don't want to be the person right before lunch because everyone's hungry and the people are bringing the food in. Now you're all well fed. Hopefully you can refocus. Yeah, my name is Tammy Davis. I'm the Invasive Species Program Coordinator for the Department of Fish and Game. And I'd like to talk with you today about invasive species. I spoke with the pre-mariculture organization when it was just the shellfish growers. And, you know, invasive species, I think, have been considered sort of a thorn in the side of aquaculture and mariculture because people in my position are often pointing fingers at aquaculture as a pathway for transmitting invasive species between different areas. That's not what I'm here to do at all. I'm here to sort of raise awareness about some of the species that are present in Alaska, particularly European green crab. That's in this big picture. It's new to Alaska as of last year. But also to let you know that invasive species often have negative impacts on your industry. So we will kind of talk about the invasive species that are present in Alaska, give you some ID information, where they're located. Luckily, we don't have a lot of marine invasive species. I'll talk about the impacts, as I said. And then what has been going on in Alaska since as far back as 2006, early detection monitoring efforts, and then ways that you can help. So I'm going to give you a really quick and dirty rundown. If you have any questions, I am always available. Please call me. Hopefully we can address some questions today if we have time, and I think we will. So some of the pathways for bringing invasive species into Alaska and moving them around the US and the globe is ballast water. If you can see, that's a ship discharging its ballast water. Ballast water is collected in one area, the ship transits to another area, and then is discharged. This industry has come a long way. Many ships now have onboard technology to clean the water and kill anything that's in there. And there are programs, especially on the West Coast, that test ballast water discharge to ensure that organisms are not getting moved around. This picture here, it's not a great picture, but there's a little orange blob right there. That is a colonial tunicate. This picture was taken in Sitka. And that's a recreational boat, the transom on the back of a recreational boat. Recreational boats, commercial boats, boats of all kinds moving from infested waters to uninfested waters are a way to move things. So in addition to the ballast water discharge, that's what's happening here, hulls are perfect substrates for fouling organisms to attach. That ship then moves, and if it sits in an area for any amount of time, those organisms can drop off, attach to other substrate, and then we've got a new invasion. Natural pathways include the current. We can't really control that. The current is the projected means for bringing larvae, green crab larvae, into Alaska. And so while we can't change the ocean currents, we can deal with invasive species as they arrive. And then finally, live food trade. And we know that at least one of the populations of European green crab down in British Columbia was the movement of live foods between locations, and it just so happened there were green crab in that. I will say that industry has adopted best management practices to a degree, and permit stipulations reduce the chances of invasive species being moved around. Okay, so the first species of interest here is Didendum vixellum. Some of you may have heard of this. It was first detected in Sitka in 2010, and then over the last 20 years, Fish and Game and Smithsonian Environmental Research Center collaborated to look at control options. So this is a colonial tunicate. It's incredibly productive. It can reproduce sexually, asexually, and genetically. So we first found it on a lantern net at an aquatic farm. And so this is a lantern net. There are oysters in there, and it's completely coated with Devex. This is another colony, pretty healthy colony, and it's grown over some native seaweed. Devex was found in Whiting Harbor, which is here. If you've ever flown into Sitka, Whiting Harbor is directly adjacent to the runway when you land. So this is Whiting Harbor. This is the aquatic farm where it was found. There was also this floating boat moorage, and Devex was pretty well spread. Basically from this area here all the way back. Patchy distribution on the benthos. This farm was pulled out because it was really infested. The boat moorage was also pulled out. Devex is still present there. Over the last 20 years, we've done 5 surveys. It doesn't appear to be leaving the area where it's been introduced. There's a lot of wave action that comes in from Sitka Sound here, and we believe that that might be keeping the Devex in there. It doesn't really like too much wave energy. Devex identification, basically for people who have infrastructure in the water, if you start to see an organism that is sort of bubbly, looks a little bit like macaroni and cheese in this form, these are long, you can't really see very well, sorry, this isn't a great picture for you, but this is also a lantern net that's suspended in the water, and it's got these long dangling protuberances. Here's another lantern net. It varies quite a bit in color. It can be sort of beige colored, yellowish, orangish. It's very sturdy. It's slick. It's sometimes called glove leather tunicate because it's that sturdy, like it feels like wet leather. We do have some native sponges that have similar appearance. The sponge is called breadcrumb sponge, so if you break it between your fingers, it crumbles, where Devex will not do that. Okay, green crabs. European green crabs were detected last year in Metlakatla, down on Annette Islands, which is the area of the Annette Islands Reserve, sovereign nation of the Metlakatla people. And Linda Shaw is here, so if you have questions, she was present when they were first detected. There's also a poster up that was put together about the green crabs. Metlakatla had been involved in early detection trapping for European green crabs for several years with no detections. Some signage was being posted in the Tamgas harbor area. They decided to do a walk around, follow the beach, and look for crab shells, molted crab shells. And indeed, they found the first evidence of green crab. Since then, Metlakatla Indian community has been trapping to remove the green crabs from that area. Just one small little bay here. And they have, last I heard was 777 crabs have been pulled out. The key characteristics to pay attention to are these 5 spines, marginal teeth that are on the outside of the eyes, and then 3 rostral bumps between the eyes. 5 spines, it's really like that's what you're looking for, 5 spines. And then here are some native crabs. Obviously, Dungeness, even red rock crabs are much larger. An adult green crab only grows to about 4 inches at its widest point across the carapace. We know that Dungies and red rock crabs get much larger than that, but juvenile specimens of either of those species might be confused. No other crab in Alaska, as far as we know, has only 5 spines. So the hairy helmet, the hairy green shore crab. These are, well, the hairy helmet especially is about the same size, but it looks quite different. Even though the green crab, its common name is green crab, it isn't just green. It can be brown, it can be reddish, orangish. This is an interesting specimen. I don't know how well the color translates, but it's actually quite yellow. It's got brown and yellow. So botryllid colonial tunicates, they're the first non-indigenous organism, invasive organism that was detected in Alaska, and that goes back as far as the early 2000s, and in possibly even the late 90s. Because invasive species have a negative impact either on an economy or an environment or human health, these might be considered a nuisance species more than an invasive species. That we're still referring to them as invasive species in the department. Similar to DVEX, it's a colonial tunicate, which means lots of individuals make up, this sort of a blob. So you're not going to be looking for an individual, you're going to be looking for a mass. It also has a similar growth form, kind of slippery. The botryllid tunicates aren't quite as sturdy as DVEX, but yeah, it's sort of a smooth, slick tunicate. There are 2 species, so this is the part I'm hoping you'll see. This is actually a scallop, and that's Botryllus schlosseri, or a golden star tunicate. And this here is another. So similarly, these have lots of different color variants. Thank you. Everything from orange, which is mostly what we've seen in Alaska, yellow. Schlosseri can be seen even as greenish as it is here. These are often associated with, as you can tell, this is a mussel with aquaculture, also on infrastructure in harbors. Okay, impacts. So generally the tunicates, the concern, particularly DVEX, is, as I showed in that lantern net, it can smother your gear, and then water flow and food resources are not accessing your oysters. I do think that there are some practices that have been adopted in the last 20 years that mean that you're not going to have as much fouling on your gear. I'm sorry, I'm not 100% up on all of your practices, so I'm here to learn as well as to share information. So it can foul your gear, but it also can grow over oysters and other shellfish and inhibit their ability to open and close to feed. The green crab has been associated with significant impacts to shellfish industries on the East Coast, and other places. Green crab are voracious predators. The estimate is that they can eat 22 clams in a day, one green crab, 4 inches. They destroy eelgrass beds. That's sort of their preferred habitat. They forage, so they're digging around for benthic organisms, worms, clams, anything that lives down in the benthos. They tear up the eelgrass. They eat some of the, especially around the nodes, the roots of the eelgrass, but they do a lot of snipping of the blades. So the impacts may or may not be direct, but if green crab are present where you're growing shellfish, your economy is directly impacted because you provide a food source to the green crabs. So I'm running out of time here. These are areas where we've had long-term citizen monitoring efforts, people putting traps in the water to look for green crabs, putting settlement plates along infrastructure to collect fouling organisms. We're hoping to grow this network moving forward. Partnership with NOAA, Metlakatla, Sea Grant to host a training in April to increase the number of people that are actively looking for invasive species, primarily the green crab. So if you're interested, please contact me. And then finally, this is really quick and easy. Learn what invasive species look like. You guys work in the water. You may have a better chance of running into them than almost any other Alaskan. You spend time on the beaches. Learn what they look like, how to identify them, report them. We have a hotline, 1-877-INVASIVE, and an online reporting portal through the ADF&G website. European green crabs are a banned invasive species in regulation, which means you can't collect them and put them in your pocket and then send a specimen. Take pictures, take lots of pictures, where you saw it, what it looks like, where you saw it, how many you saw, etc. And then share what you know, right? Spread the word, help us help you. So I'm out of time, but thanks everyone. If you have questions, I'm around, and you can reach me by email or phone. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tammy. So important. Next, we have Adelia Myrick from Alaska Sea Greens. Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah. Oh, okay. How do I?
They should pull it up and then this goes.
That's the pointer. Yeah. And then just like this. Do I have to aim it at something?
You just gotta
Hi, I'm Adelia Myrick, and together with my husband Talif, we have a kelp farm on the remote west side of Kodiak Island, where we are also salmon fishermen and remote homesteaders. I wanted to talk to you today about a challenge that we faced when harvesting, which is how to get our bags full of kelp out of the skiff. But first, before I go on, I just want to say harvesting into bags is not our idea. Thank you to Alf and Nick for showing us how to do that. And Dave Bailey mentioned this a little bit before lunch, so that's kind of a good starting point. Our problem is not how to harvest into the bags, it's how to get the bags out of the skiff, and I'll explain a little bit more about why that's a problem. So just to set the scene, we are 61 miles from the town of Kodiak, where our kelp is harvested. And so what has to happen is a tender comes to pick up our kelp. It's about 8 hours. And in order to maximize the efficiency of the tender and also to keep the kelp fresh, we need to have it harvested as much possible before the tender makes it to us, so they can turn and burn and get back to town before the kelp starts to degrade. Our goal is to get the bags in the water and have them waiting when the tender gets there. But as you can see, we just have this very small little skiff that we use for set netting. And we don't have a master boom or a davit or anything. So how do we get it out? We also have another challenge, which is the salmon season starts right away after the kelp harvest. So we can't really make radical changes to the skiff because it won't be ready, it won't be fixed and ready to fish in time. So we put on our thinking caps. Luckily, in my case, Tolliff's thinking cap takes the form of a welding hood. And so we got to work. And so here we are putting the kelp into bags, but how do we get it out? We took an idea from another fishery. That's me crab fishing a couple years ago. I've since retired, thank goodness. But and this is the reason that Tolliff isn't here today, is he just got back yesterday from crab season. But anyway, you can see me standing next to the crab pot launcher here, so the crab pot sits on there, and when we're ready to set it, it hinges up and the crab pot falls into the ocean. So we were trying to do a similar thing with our skiff. So we came up with this little aluminum box attached to a sheet of aluminum that's on a hinge on the rail. We already have a hydraulic power pack in the skiff for running the line hauler, so it was easy to just connect a ram, which is under here. You can't really see it, but when extended, it tips that over and into the water. And that's in the upright position. That bag is about to slide out. This is not a full harvest bag, it's just a sample, but it sort of lifts up and tilts it out. And I think, oh yeah, there we go. Here's a little video of it in action. Ideally, it would flip up a little bit higher, so maybe next year we'll do that, but he had to help it a little bit. But anyway, it's something that's really easy for us to put in and then take out very quickly to get ready for salmon. And it doesn't require a mast and boom. So, unfortunately, Tolliff isn't here, but he's the engineer. I'm going to give you his phone number and email address if you'd like to contact him. He actually really likes to talk and talk shop, and thinking outside of the box is one of his fortes, so feel free to contact him. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was an awesome innovation. Next, we have Nick Mangini from Kodiak Island Sustainable Seaweed. Thanks for coming up.
Thank you. Do I have to talk in this one, or can I talk into that?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Nick Mangini, Kodiak Island Sustainable Seaweeds. Today I was asked to talk about barriers facing farmers in Alaska today. So, to do that, I just sent out an email asking 32 farmers or industry around the state, what do you see as the greatest challenges facing farmers in Alaska today? So, by and large, the number one answer is processing. There's a lot of hang-ups. We all in the industry have dealt with them. So the lack of processing and processing capacity is limiting the ability for farmers to sell enough kelp to sustain a viable business model. So some of the answers that the farmers came up with with this problem was these things. You know, collaboration among current processors in the kelp industry, and the fishing industry is a great answer, because they already have all of the equipment that we need to do all of these, processing techniques. Creative ways to vertically integrate is possible. Multi-use facilities to share in the costs, drying components regionally, grow the overall market for the U.S. food sector. Find more ways for kelp being existing products like barnacle is. I think that's super important. We need to get in the mainstream. Number 2 was the supply chain. Current options for moving product at scale is far too expensive to allow most processors to move to Alaska. If you've tried to find a kelp processor, then this is their number one hang-up. Moving product out of Alaska is expensive. And most of that comes from the fact that we're shipping water, a large amount of it. So we need to do some of these things, stabilize products through freezing, drying, fermentation, bring down the shipping costs by not shipping water. We need to start drying large volumes. We also need the addition of biorefineries in the state and cooperatives to increase available supply to these processors. Permitting was the third answer, and there's a number of different reasons. I outlined some of them here, not all of them. People have touched on how expensive it is to farm. I didn't include that because I figured it was kind of a foregone conclusion. Although vastly better than it was, many issues remain in the permitting process. So outreach within the communities to grow acceptance of farmers is one that's really near and dear to me. I think it's important that we teach the community what our farms are going to look like, that we're not going to leave them sitting out there, and that, in a lot of ways they're, pretty sophisticated and develop similar site plans with proven methods, and that kind of touches on the other one. The more that we can collaborate to build farms that we know work correctly and that people are less afraid of is really important. Minimize conflict, popular public use areas, business plans, finalization. Having a buyer and a price to build on is like the number one key for a lot of people in the permitting process. And then lastly, a revision process that is quicker than the actual review to allow farmers to make needed changes before they have to turn in their final permit. These are a few things that I thought were important just to touch on. We Alaskans may never see the opportunity to exploit niche markets in the ways the East Coast can. That's because they have 180 million people within 12 hours of trucking of their sites. So that's a big difference. In Alaska, it's 2 weeks to get our stuff just to Seattle, where it can begin its journey. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind as we build this industry. Short-term, small farms will not be able to support business unless vertically integrated. I think this is true and not true. And again, this is 32 farmers' thoughts, not just mine. And the need for us all to work with one another is greater than ever. Take advantage of the funding opportunities available to begin to clear a number of these hurdles. And if we do all that, then we can make Alaska the leader in kelp production. So that's it.
Thanks so much. Next, we have a video on House Oysters from John Cotton and Shawn Thomas from House Oysters and Devil's Apron Seafarms.
When I was a little boy on family trips, every time we'd stop near the ocean, I'd run to the water. I would be looking for minnows, I call them. Everything were minnows. I've always been chasing fish. I fish for groundfish, pollock, haddock, cod, all the flatfish, monkfish, lobster offshore in the winter. Tuna fishing is still one of my great loves. I was born like this, and there's nothing I could do about it.
When I met John the first time, energetically, I was like, whoa.
I got a new door I made. A lot of film on my back. You want to come out here? No, you're staying.
John is very passionate and energetic. When he dives into something, it's like he's just gone in. He has a dynamic that I find electric and exhausting at times. I was really drawn to him and his love of the water. We're both inspired by this place. When I began photographing the fishermen of Port Clyde, I felt like it was important to document such rapid change in the fishery.
There used to be so many options for us. Shrimping, that's closed. Ground fishing has collapsed. It's very, very hard to make a living. And now the water's warming, and we don't know what's going to happen with the lobster fishery. It is very hard to manage. Never know what's coming down the pike. Whether it's climate change, new regulations, the market's changing, it's the nature of the business. You have got to adapt. These are small oyster bags for baby oysters. This is all the stuff you build lobster traps with, which I probably built about 10,000 or more traps in my life. I use a lot of that same stuff just because I already have it. When I was about 25, when we were lobstering, we'd see a couple of aquaculture guys around. We laughed. These guys are never going to make it. It was for the guy who couldn't go lobstering or was a lobsterman but didn't do well. But after fishing for almost 40 years offshore, I could see the benefits.
Definitely when I was younger, I remember that he would be gone for like a long time.
Rip it right off.
So it's nice to have him around.
Those are nice oysters, aren't they?
Yeah.
Beauties. Hey, how you doing?
He's so into oysters. It's really fun to see how interested he is.
You have to re-tag them all? There's probably 20,000, maybe more.
Everything kind of evolves, and you have to evolve with it. But it's definitely important to keep something of the original.
So beautiful out.
I think my dad does that really well.
We've been experimenting with bottom grown, floating bags, some intertidal ones that float up and down the tide. And I looked at a lot like microbrews. We had to find a way to stand apart.
Oh, that's a beauty. Look at that one.
Wow. That is nice, but not yet.
Right.
It's taken us years to get to this point. We wanted to go slowly to learn about our site and the oysters and the flavor.
And that did end up making a difference. They're much more briny than most oysters, and they have a really clean finish.
It's been really fun to watch John finding another passion on the water. And I love that we get to do this as a family.
Yeah, that's what we gotta do. Well, I'm very happy with where we ended up. If you open and change, good things can happen to you. I'm living it right now.
Now we'll switch back to Alaska oyster farming and Jimmy Greeley, making do with what you have. Welcome.
Thanks. Do I just click the button here? Oh, good. Well, I'm James Greeley with Tommaso Shellfish. I got started doing this about 12 years ago, thanks to my dad, kind of just threw me into it, I guess you could say. Over the 12 years, we started with basically just a lease site, and I had to go through and figure out how to build our grow out work raft and such. We'll get to once. Yeah, just kind of start from how to do this. It's kind of how to do it. So, yeah, it's basically we have about a 4-acre lease in Sea Otter Sound. We have roughly, here's a picture of my dad and I float in the background there. To anchor it, we use some gabion baskets that we just filled with rocks on the beach there. You can see here we started with it was a 40 by 30 log raft. I milled the lumber for all the raft, and then had one of my carpenter neighbors come out and build a post and beam structure on it, which probably in the future I would use not a permanent structure on a log raft, but it's still hanging in there. We have the grow out rafts here, and I use a I-beam hoist system, which I basically took like a Harbor Freight ATV winch with a battery, built a little battery box, and I just roll it out and then just lower them into the water there. Another method we use is I use these round tumbler baskets, I believe they're called. They're from Aquamesh, the same people I buy my square baskets from. This way, my young oysters, I can basically keep a little better management of them, and then once every couple weeks or about once a month or so, I pull them out and give them like a little tumble without having to pull them out of the basket and then through a tumbler and then back in a basket again. And then for like sales and such, I put them into the Yeti coolers there on processor ice. Here's But recently we've gotten a tumbler from Shell Game Products. Fairly inexpensive, real easy to use, real easy to maintain. Does a pretty good job. My one suggestion would be to make sure you get the right size holes for when you're looking at doing a tumbler. So make sure, because I got 2 tubes, but one tube, the holes are just a little too small on the first part, so kind of useless on that first part there. But as far as then the counting part, I believe they're called, the slang term for them, I don't even know if it's call them the Mexican trays, because I think in Mexico they stack them on the beach or something. But I use those for counting, so I can do a dozen in each corner, and then kind of base my counting off that. It's really easy, a real easy method I've noticed to use. So these are all just like little things I've picked up going along the way, kind of to make life a little easier. Over the years, we started using plastic, like Norplex bags or whatever. But we found a place, I think someone mentioned it earlier, it's out of Maine, I think. These biodegradable bags, they're amazing. They come in a big roll. They disappear after a couple of weeks. It's easy to people don't have to give them back to me, which is one of the problems. People always give these plastic oyster bags back, and then I'm like, well, I can't really reuse them too much. So it makes things a little bit easier on that aspect. But basically I'm just a simple oyster farmer. You just take the oysters out of the water, shake them up in the basket, put them in a bag, and put them in a cooler, and deliver them to wherever they need to go, you know? It's like, so if anyone wants to get in contact with me, you know, there's my info. You can find us on Instagram at Tommaso Shellfish, and yeah, pretty simple. So thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks everyone. So that ends the farm operations session. So again, we want to encourage tabletop discussions. So we have about 20 minutes. There are questions on your tables that you are welcome to go through, but talk about successes, innovations, concerns, in regards to farm operations, both shellfish and seaweed. And again, Erin's gonna run around the room right at our break time and pick up notes. So I would encourage someone to be a scribe and take some notes and highlight those top things that come to the top of the conversation. All right, thanks.